Tried that for a number of years with China, being involved in the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, or the SNED, over the years. And to be frank, there's been a lot more rhetoric than action. And so I think the Trump administration made this decision that they needed to get the attention of China through tariffs as a way of ultimately saying this relationship has to change.
China has, I am quite sure, a very good economic map with which they will target certain places in the United States where the pain will be maximized.
I don't know what damage they'll do China. I just think that they'll do damage to the American economy even before China retaliates. Okay. They'll do damage because they'll mean higher prices in all the industries that use steel, where 40 times as many people work.
Some of the comments from the movers and shakers attending the China Development Forum in Beijing. Trade has become one of the key themes this year, and there was a major development on that front just this morning. South Korea and the US have agreed in principle on a revised free trade pact. Seoul securing exemption from Washington on the steel tariffs, but at a cost. South Korea needs to double the import quota for American-made cars as part of the new terms, and allow Washington to keep its 25% tariffs on Korean pickup trucks in place for more than 20 years. Well, let's get more now with Tori Whiting, a research associate at conservative US think tank, the Heritage Foundation, joining us live on the line from Washington. Tori, pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today. What are your thoughts on this tit-for-tat that we're seeing currently between China and the US? Do you think that there is a real chance that it could escalate into a full-blown trade war?
Well, I wouldn't say that we are necessarily in the midst of a trade war right now, but what I will say is that what we know is that tariffs are just going to increase prices here in the United States. The purpose of a tariff is to increase prices, and whether the administration says this is going to punish China or not, really who it's going to punish are American businesses, workers, farmers, ranchers, and families when they go to buy anything made of steel or aluminum, or want to purchase anything that is, going to end up being covered under these lists of products that are going to be restricted from China under the 301.
So do you see this as a negotiating tactic coming out of the White House, or do you think it's something more?
I would say that if this is a negotiating tactic, it's a really poor way to go about it. The purpose of the government should not be to make things more expensive for the American people. The goal of the administration should make it easier to do business here in the United States, which this administration has done a great job at doing. But this is really going in the opposite direction. So if this is a negotiating tactic, I think the administration needs to rethink their priorities and figure out ways to have trade negotiations that aren't putting the American people, families, and businesses at risk.
So what is the biggest risk that you see right now, Tori?
The biggest risk I see right now from an economic perspective is the increase in costs for our manufacturers here in the United States. I think that, when you increase the price of a vital input for these manufacturers, whether it's an auto manufacturer or even the construction industry in the United States, I think you had some previous folks who pointed out that there are a large number of Americans who are employed in these sectors that use these products. Somewhere around 17 million Americans are employed by industries that use steel and aluminum as a means of production, versus, about 140,000 people employed in the steel industry. And some of the economic analyses that we've seen estimate anywhere between 150,000 to even more than 400,000 jobs could be lost because of the steel and aluminum tariffs, not only because of higher prices, but also because of retaliation from some of our trading partners.
And this doesn't take into account the announcement that we heard on Thursday last week with regards to the Section 301 issues, correct?
That's very correct, and you bring up a great point with that, because, the steel and aluminum tariffs actually will have little to no effect on China. However, the president did announce a new, what I'm calling a new China policy from the White House this week, and it's kind of a three-pronged policy. The first is tariffs, which will go under a pretty long review process of up to about 60 days before they could actually go into effect. The other two parts, which I actually think are actually getting at the problem, are a a consultation request filed by the Office of the United States Trade Representative against China on their intellectual property practices and forced tech transfers. I think that's a great move for the administration to take, and that's the one they should be taking. It's going to have the least amount of negative effect on American consumers. You know, the third part of it is in restricting investment, which honestly the United States Congress has already made some great moves to reform our CFIUS program. That's the organization that, you know, filters through different types of investment coming into the United States. So, I mean, those two parts of this three-pronged policy by the administration is really, they're really going to be going in the right direction.
Okay. So if this 60-day consulting period does end in some, I guess, worthwhile negotiations, do you see these additional $60 billion as not being an issue if, in fact, these they could be negotiated away? I mean, is that possible?
Well, I think that right now you're at a position where both sides are really digging in their heels. You know, a lot of the rhetoric you see coming out of the White House is very strong. You see very similar strong rhetoric coming from the Chinese government that they're not afraid of a trade war and they'll stick up for their industries. So I think that going that route is just going to stimulate more economic aggression against one another. I think the role of the United States in this situation and the best path forward for the United States in this situation is to go through our international organizations like the World Trade Organization to partner with our allies who are great trading partners, Korea, Japan, Mexico, Canada, the EU, and to partner with all of those other countries to come up with a collective solution against China because, like I said, imposing tariffs is just going to increase costs for Americans.
Okay. All right, Tori, great to have you with us. Appreciate your time.